but let's start the meeting. This is the Urban Renewal Agency. This is a work meeting today, a special meeting, June 15th. No, today is not June 15th. Today is actually June 25th. Okay, and those of us who are here, Tara, Harry, Jeff, Midge, and maybe Joanne.
Yeah.
But I can't recall if she's traveling again still.
I thought we picked this date so she could be here.
We did.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Marcy a couple of days ago and asked her for her off the top of her head thoughts. And at some point when it's relevant, I will bring those up. So do we have Jeremy on the TV?
Yeah, right there.
Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you. Thank you.
This is great, Jeremy.
And thank you for putting this lovely few pages together for us. Since I'm sure we haven't had a chance to read it yet. Can you just sort of give us an overview of what we should be considering?
Sure. Yeah, so I just took a quick, this is just a kind of a quick and dirty pros and cons of form-based code and how it might fit into Red Lodge, kind of based on your current planning documents. I think based on discussions that I've had with the URD, with Kansas State University, the planning board, on historic values and that north entrance, it might be a good fit for the north entrance. I think there's a few things to keep in mind that, one thing we want to try not to do is overregulate. That tends to discourage development, right? So I think in form-based code, with any code, including just regular typical zoning regulations, you can be too overly restrictive to where it becomes hard to develop anything, right? So I think we need, just making sure that we have a good balance of what the city would like to see versus, not trying to overregulate, I think is important. So that being said, I think a few good points, the North Gateway character, the form-based code would better, discuss. I think the Kansas State study was a good starting point for a discussion on form-based code because it provided, I think, several options on what you could potentially do with a piece of property in that zone. And so I think it's an opportunity to start the discussion about building placement, what kind of frontage type you want, parking placement, what that kind of thing. And I think it's also important to note that form-based code, typically when you switch to form-based code, you're not so concerned about use. It's really about the look and feel of the development and how it fits within that district, right? So you're swapping the typical zoning regulations where you're regulating land use, right, and strict setbacks and things like that, with more of a this is what we'd like to see in mass and scale, right, in parking and landscaping and those sorts of things, and you really don't regulate land use per se. Now, not to say you couldn't do a hybrid zoning where you have the form-based code with maybe some land use restrictions, like certain things you don't want to see in that district, right? Which you could do that. You could have a section on restrictions on certain types of uses that you don't want in that district. So I think those are just kind of high-level thoughts. I think pros of form-based code is, you have more predictable outcomes on what to expect as far as, building mass, location, height, how it fits with the street and entrance characteristics. versus normal zoning, we don't typically get into, building design necessarily, that sort of thing. It's, as long as you meet the setbacks, as long as you meet the parking requirements, as long as the land use meets, we don't care so much about what this looks like, right? So those are kind of the trade-offs. Um, the form-based code would uh, potentially fit better with your downtown master plan, your revitalization plan, growth policy goals and objectives, for that entrance area. It would provide a, stronger gateway identity, which is what you're looking for. Could potentially provide an improved walkability, bike and pedestrian safety, if you build those kind of things into your code. Better housing implementation. This is one thing that I think that might be, because you're not necessarily restricting land use with form-based code. You're just looking at building, placement and sizing and those sorts of things. You're not so concerned with, okay, how many dwelling units are on this, how many dwelling units per square foot, right? You're not concerned with those kinds of aspects. So it could be a better implementation for implementing housing needs, potentially. And then it could help with the clearer use of TIF funds. So, TIF investments such as streetscape, utilities, sidewalks, those sorts of things, might help guide where those TIF funds could be used. Some of the cons and cautions to keep in mind is it does take a lot of upfront work. So you're not, that's one thing I want to emphasize with this group, and I'll reiterate this to the planning board at some point as well. Form-based code is not we develop this in a couple of months, we slap it into the zoning regulations and we're done, right? It takes a lot of upfront work to develop a form-based code that is going to work well for the community. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to slap something in there that's gonna stop development or stop or over-regulate to where people don't want to develop there, because if hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of work that goes into this, and there's a lot of public engagement. So I think the Kansas State study, I think, kind of kicked that off a little bit, but that is one very small step, right? So essentially, now the next step is to look at that study and what they came up with for those properties, and kind of identify the URD and the planning board to kind of identify what we liked about that, what we don't like about that, and start to kind of form an idea of what you would like to see in a form-based code within that district. And so my recommendation would be that, the URD probably, send this, if you want to consider form-based code within the community north entrance, to probably make a recommendation to the planning board to consider that. And then the planning board make a recommendation to the city council. And then the city council provide direction to both the URD and the planning board on whether to move forward with that or not. And I think the other part of that is cost, right? So, you're going to want to engage a consultant to do that work. And I mean, I think going after a Department of Commerce CDBG planning grant, or engaging Department of Commerce Community Technical Assistance Program to engage a consultant to help with this is going to be super important, right? So I think, because this is going to be, I would say, at least a year process, because of the community engagement and the development of the figures and stuff that go in the zoning and things like that. I think that's important to recognize that this is not a quick process to do it right. Some in the community may feel that this could be perceived as overregulation. And so I think that community engagement and engaging the right consultants and that sort of thing is going to be really important during the process. Staff capacity and training, it could, that's something down the road, depending on how, if the city hires a planner, a planner on staff at some point in the future again, or how you do that. But also training the planning board and other staff, city council members on what is form-based code and how are they involved with that process. It may increase development costs in some manner, just because you are dictating certain things and certain massing of buildings and stuff like that you want to see, right? So it could, in theory, potentially increase development cost. And then, anything you do obviously has to fit within your growth policy, your downtown master plan, and within Montana zoning laws, for, and that sort of thing. So again, I think that the important thing to understand here is that this is just a very small first step, to going down that path. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that this is not going to be implemented in a couple of months. This is, it's going to be a longer process than that. And understanding the planning board is currently going through their zoning regulations right now. And so, I think that hopefully in the next couple of months, we kind of have that wrapped up, and we're ready, we're ready to move on to some other things. But I think the thing that I would recommend, I think I have some recommendations, or there's some recommended approaches to this. The first one is a form-based code overlay, which I think is probably the best option, honestly, for Red Lodge is option A. That basically creates an overlay zoning district, over the top of the C3N district, or a portion of the C3N district, wherever you want that to be. And that's where you adopt that form-based code to overlay, to put those, those additional form-based zoning restrictions within that district. So that would be my recommendation, is kind of an overlay district. Obviously rewriting C3N district regulations completely and switching to form-based code is also an option. And then, what Billings actually did in their downtown was they actually split theirs up into separate sub districts within their districts to identify what they wanted to see in certain areas. Now, your area is not as large, so I think that's getting overly complicated probably than what you need. But that's obviously an option. So I think the next step, I think I put at the very end, I put some discussion questions that you guys could start with, and maybe base it on the Kansas State study. And that is, what should a visitor see and feel when entering Red Lodge from the north? Right? These are things to consider and talk about. Should this area become an extension of downtown, be a mixed-use gateway, housing, or a combination? Which documents are non-negotiable, or outcomes, excuse me. No front parking lots, connected sidewalks, limited curb cuts, building orientation, housing variety, those sorts of things. Where should the code be strict and where should it be flexible, right? So those are things to consider on what you want. This absolutely has to be met, and other things, building height, maybe we're not as worried about, or that sort of thing. What TIF investments would make the desired private development feasible? Should compliance with form-based standards make URD and TIF project applications more competitive? So this is more on the TIF application side, right? So if they're complying with that form-based standard, that should make their application more competitive. Are there specific building types Red Lodge wants to encourage, such as live, work, townhomes, apartments, mixed-use buildings, courtyard housing, or lodging, or commercial? And then what should be avoided? Strip commercial, large blank walls, disconnected parking lots, excessive curb cuts, highway rotation, signage, and single-use low-density development. So I think that's kind of my thoughts. This was kind of quick and dirty. I didn't have a lot of time to dive into it, but I think this gives you at least a starting point and some thoughts for me, at least, on where to go from here.
Jeremy, I have a question. What would a form-based overlay look like, and how different would that be from just leaving the C3N zoning there?
Good question.
So the overlay district is essentially, let's see, how do I put this? So the overlay district puts essentially additional requirements on top of the underlying zoning district. So your underlying, but it can also override some of those restrictions underneath. So for instance, if your C3N is a certain size, if you wanted to make your wanted to make your form-based code just along the properties that are street frontage, but you didn't want to affect the lots, say, that are one block in or one block over from the main street, right? Then you set up that overlay district, and that overlay district could override, say, the setback requirements and use requirements and stuff of the underlying zoning district, and essentially switch it to this form-based code requirements. Or you could pick, you could say, well, we still want the land use restrictions, so we still want those, but we don't necessarily care so much about setbacks and things like that. We want the form-based code to override those physical characteristics or those physical requirements.
Okay, cool. I have a hard time visualizing that, but I'll work on it.
Look, we've talked a little bit about the overlay in the planning board, but Jerry, I don't know if you recall, but not all of C3 North is in the urban renewal district. The urban renewal district encompasses most of C3 North, but not all of it. So that's why I think the overlay kind of fits in, because then we can have C3 North general and then the overlay special district. But in addition to Midge's question, we've talked about planned unit development. Does that have to be initiated by property owner developer, or can that actually come from the city itself, just creating
PUD is strictly initiated by a developer. So
okay.
A PUD is if somebody comes in and they want to do something different, essentially it's a big variance for their project, right? If you really think of it that way, right? So they come in and they're like, hey, we really have this great plan. We really have this great idea for development of this block of the city. And, it doesn't really fit your zoning standards for this district. And so we basically would so they would come in as a planned unit development, in which you would go through that process for review, which would essentially allow the city to, review their proposal, put conditions on that, say things like that. So it's basically, I would think of it as one big variance essentially for a development. But planned unit development is really intended for a larger scale project. So say somebody bought, several blocks or a block of property, and they wanted to do a large, it's not intended for like one single lot, right? Like one small single lot, unless it's, so like in the zoning, it's like a, 1 acre, to 2 acre lot, size, maybe half acre to an acre, something like that. It's not meant for like a 10,000 square foot lot, where you would just apply for a variance to height or setbacks or parking or something like that. It's meant for a larger concept, maybe mixed use development type concept, where you want, a larger plan review. If that makes sense. So but no, that's definitely initiated by a developer, and anything the city wants to do has to be, basically in your zoning. So if you want to allow different things, then you either do overlay districts, you do a new district, or you modify an existing district you already have.
I think I can address Midge's question a little bit. So right now, our zoning for the NC3 North talks about 10-foot setback, frontage setback. So looking at some of the scenarios that Kansas State presented, they presented the option or having, more green space or park space in, towards the street. And so, under current zoning, they wouldn't be able to do that. But with what Jeremy was talking about in terms of an overlay that would allow some flexibility to adjust what the setback is, that's what the overlay would allow us to do. So that's kind of a real world example of what our current zoning says and how it aligns with the scenarios that Kansas State presented and where that disconnect could be. So either change the zoning setbacks for C3 North, or you think about an overlay that will better conform, allow the city to better implement and achieve the vision of what we see for the urban renewal area. That's kind of the way I see it. Did I explain that okay, Jeremy?
Yeah, basically. I was thinking I might show the, just a brief, just show on the screen. Dave, could you turn on sharing? But I was going to
show your request in the background already, so.
I was going to share the billings code with you guys if you want to see that just briefly. So you can kind of get a feel for that, what that looks like. But so this is the commercial, this is their commercial mixed use districts. And essentially, they have at the beginning, they have, restrictions, essentially, exceptions and exemptions and stuff like that at the beginning. Certain requirements for each district all laid out the front, kind of short and sweet. And then down here, now you're getting into the standards, the district regulations, right? It's all centered around what, can you read that okay?
No, not really.
Not at all.
In fact, no.
I can try to zoom in.
I thought we were gonna see a picture.
Yeah.
And if you want to share the link later,
Share the link.
Jeremy, we can
Yeah.
forward that on to everybody too, but.
That'd be great.
A lot.
Okay, but
That would be
essentially what they did right was in those regulations was, in each district, they have building siting, right? There's no use standards, there's no setback, there are some setback restrictions, but very minimal, but it's really building siting. How do we want, lot coverages, but there's no use restrictions. Then they have parking siting. They're very specific, we want parking limited to the rear or side, not the front, right? Things like that. They have the height requirements, certain height requirements for each story on a building, it gets fairly specific. Then theirs actually goes into windows, doors, and roof requirements as well. Now, I don't know if we necessarily need to go that far with it because that's kind of getting it into architectural standards, which I'm not sure we want to go down that road, but that is something that you could potentially do. And then they have figures that kind of lay out what the table is saying. And so they have that for each district. Basically for each of the districts, they have the same thing, but it's based on, the building, not necessarily the use. So, and how that fits with the street and everything else. So, I can send this link over I'll send it to Dave and he can pass that on to you. You guys can take a look at that whenever you want.
And that was a specific portion of the code, not just billings, zoning. You had spots to narrow into, maybe include the reference.
This should take you right to their commercial mixed use district.
Okay.
Jeremy, how did they develop that? Did they have a consultant and,
No, I believe they have planning staff, right? So they have several planners on staff. Um, I I can't remember. It's been several years since they did that. I think the internal planning staff did it. I
Mhm.
believe it took them several years to do it. But I know other places do hire a consultant. I think Helena might be in the middle of their zoning regulation updates right now, and they did hire a consultant, and they are looking at some form-based code in their downtown. They just started that process, so I don't know what's going to come of that. But I know in Red Lodge's particular case, I think because you would be going after grant funds to potentially do this, to hopefully offset the cost to the city, you would ultimately hire a consultant to help you through this process, right? Um, and go through that community engagement process and things like that. The other option, like I said, is the Community Technical Assistance Program through Department of Commerce. They have funds to help communities with things like this. In that case, they have consultants that they have pre-qualified essentially on a list that they select from, and they pay them directly to work with the city to develop these kinds of things. So CTAP funding may also be an option to have Department of Commerce come in and help you guys develop something like this. So I think it's just kind of how in the CDBG grant column, the city of Red Lodge gets to dictate that, direct that effort. And you get to hire the consultant you want to do that work. In the CTAP option, CTAP runs that show. CTAP hires the consultants. You don't get to select the consultant, right? And they kind of dictate that, and then they work with you guys to develop that code. So it kind of just depends on how how you want to go about that, the management of it more than anything else, right? But I think the important thing is I think the planning board should get through their zoning regulation updates they currently are going through right now, and get that done. And then, not saying you guys can't start a conversation on this and kind of get the ball rolling in that direction, but I think throwing that into the mix with what we're currently doing is probably not what we want to do. We want to focus on getting those edits done that we're doing right now, and then we can roll into potentially working on form-based code after that, like an overlay district or something like that.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say, Jeremy, is your recommended approach is go with option A. So our planning board chair doesn't have a stroke or something other severe because we're gonna take so long to get finish the review.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's my recommendation. I think the URD should make that recommendation. My recommendation to the URD is to make a recommendation to the planning board to consider development of a form-based code overlay district for the C3N, and
Okay.
and ask the planning board to consider that and make a recommendation to the city council. And then basically the planning board sends their recommendation to the city council, and then the city council can make a determination on whether to direct staff to pursue grant funds, to talk to CTAP about funding that effort, or directing the planning board and URD to start working on that effort or something like that, right? I don't know quite yet what that might look like, but that would then kind of put it in the city council's court on whether or not they want to do that. Because I mean, you are talking about funding, right? So it's either my time or going after grant funds and expending city funds for that match, those match funds, or entering into an agreement with Department of Commerce for CTAP funding or something like that, where the city council should be involved with that discussion just from a financial standpoint.
I guess one of my thoughts just off the top of my head is that the longer we take to get this sort of set and moving forward, the longer it's gonna take.
Yeah.
And we don't really want that. We'd like to see realizing that change is incremental. We'd like to, I think I, anyway, would like to see it starting. And so I have to wonder, and at the same time, I think raising the cost of development is a deal breaker. So why would we want to do that? We'd like to see changes happen, but if nobody can do it because it's too expensive, nobody will do it. So I just wonder, and this is probably crazy, we have some big ideas of what we want. We want, and here they are, the desired outcomes: no front parking lots, sidewalks, trees, a welcoming feel for people who come, and then things we don't want. Commercial strips, big disconnected parking lots. Can we take those big bubbles of ideas and start with those? Or is that just silly because we're talking about zoning? I don't want to overregulate, and I don't want to raise the price.
Well, look, not to steal from Jeremy, but those are all things you just brought up are all possible to do through an overlay.
Right.
Right.
We can stipulate that for
Okay.
our portion of C3 North.
But what I'm sort of
Well-
hearing is that doing an overlay is a pain in the neck and it's time consuming. It's
No.
not.
That's a
Okay.
quick and
It's a
easy way.
process.
Okay, so
It's
that's
a
the easiest
process.
thing to do.
I
Well,
think, Jeremy,
the overlay district is not complicated. It's the form-based code portion
Okay.
that's complicated.
Okay.
So,
Got it.
So if you wanted to do if the planning board chose to do an overlay district during their current regulation update, right? Then we could develop a simple overlay district that just puts some of those restrictions and
I
concepts
get it.
writing in the regulation.
Okay.
It's the form-based code portion of, that gets into basically a whole new realm of what Red Lodge has not done in the past.
Right.
That really talks about building design and placement and massing and, and all those things. Those are things that you really want to have a lot of community involvement in with the business community, development community, realtors, public, all those entities need to have a seat at the table with that discussion. So not only so that they can provide input, but you can understand the real world implications of what you're doing, right? They're going to be able to really let you know, hey, this is not cost effective. If you make this do this, it's going to increase building costs in that district by 20%, or something like that, right? And then you're like, well, we don't want to do that.
but just to clarify, so if we follow your suggestion, which I think is an excellent one, so the planning board and the city would adopt their current revisions and edits. Those are in effect until something else is developed to put on top. So you're not waiting for that to happen. You can still develop under the existing rules, right? And so I think it's a win-win.
Okay.
It's worrying about sustainability and the future at the same time as it's not stopping us proceeding tomorrow with something.
Great.
So-
Okay. Thank you.
To your point, Joanne, the more hurdles that we add to the process, the longer it will take.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do on the planning board is get through
Right.
the old zoning, and we're making a number of changes, but
Right.
we can't, until that is completed and approved by the city council.
Right.
We still have to live under the old rules, which
Right.
means, right now, if we get somebody wants a different usage, or it's a conditional approval,
Mm-hmm.
they have to come before the planning board, and we have to look at the old rules, which we're not necessarily happy with, but we're locked
Right,
into that.
right.
So,
So the sooner you can update the
Yeah.
current ones, the better.
yes,
And then, but if we have a resolution before the planning board and before the city, we can start the other process going forward to something that's going to be better in the long run and more sustainable and more protective of our whole community and what it looks like.
so, Jeremy, I guess I kind of look at our zoning rules and regulations, and I think that it's easy for people to think of zoning, especially Euclidean, as very black and white. But what we've done and what we're trying to do is we're trying to take something black and white and have some areas that are actually shades of gray.
Right.
And we've done that by tying it to our master plan, our growth plan.
Right.
And so there's actually language in there that it's not all just you can do this and you can't do that.
Mhm.
It's this is what we would want to see. And that is, we've done that. So if you get a chance, look at our current, because we have a historic overlay for downtown.
Mhm.
And that means that for development downtown, it has to fit within the character of
Mhm.
as we've defined it in the historic overlay. And that's basically what we're looking at for C3 North, or at least for the URD portion,
Mhm.
is it has to fit into, as we define, with regards to setback, with regards to type of commercial development, with regards to, which is different than just a simple list of can do this, can't do that. So, anyway, I think it's been a good conversation. I appreciate Jeremy's presence.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
I
do
think
too.
I think we could, in the short term, which the planning board, I believe, has already kind of talked about doing a URD overlay district in the C3N when we were back talking about the district standards. And I think we were going to revisit that, if I recall, when we come back around and do one final pass through the zoning regulations. But I think it would be fairly simple to add a URD, and we can even call it the Urban Renewal District Overlay, and put in some of those concepts and ideas that you just talked about, as far as use restrictions, like no strip malls, some of those things, we could put in there and try to then also like you talked about, have that kind of a try to build in some flexibility with the other uses we do want, right? And so I think that could be an interim step. And then since you already have that district basically that overlay district set up, then the next step is to work on just updating that district standard into a form-based code, if that's what you want to do. So I think the interim step would be, let's get the overlay established. Let's get some interim kind of regulations set up in that overlay to allow the city some flexibility and put some use restrictions in there, what we don't want. And then that springboards off to a discussion down the road about form-based code, and you'd already have the district set up. Essentially, you just have to modify the district standards to a form-based standard.
So one other thing, Jeremy, I know you've seen the KSU presentation, especially the part where they did some examples of different buildings, which we still need to refine that, narrow that down, because we have some definite ideas about what we would like to see and not like to see. But the other part is the walking paths, the sidewalks, the streets, none of which exist. And that's so far beyond, I think, the scope of what we're capable of doing, other than saying we'd like to see it. Because, what all would be involved in bringing all that to fruition, as far as streets, street extensions, expansion, sidewalks, et cetera.
Well, that would have to be in conjunction with engineering standards, right? Because your zoning doesn't dictate what's in the public right of way.
Right.
So zoning only dictates what's developed on private property. Engineering standards for the city of Red Lodge is what dictates what goes in the public space, right? So that's where you would develop the concept. And what you're talking about is essentially what we call complete streets. So, Helena, I think Bozeman, Missoula, they all have complete streets regulations or policies, in which dictates, okay, if you're developing a city street right of way, these are the things you have to have, right? And there's different it does allow flexibility. So it has several different typical sections for a streetscape. And it could be, if you have on-street parking and it's 40 feet wide, you have to have sidewalks on both sides, right? Or if you want to do limited on-street parking, you could provide bike lanes, and there's just different concept and different avenues. And I can provide a copy of like Helena's Complete Streets policy if you'd like to see that. But that's where, I think the form-based code also has to coincide with the city's development regulations or engineering standards, right? So that they kind of all flow in that same direction. Now, understand that your engineering standards don't dictate what happens within the highway right of way. MDT can do whatever they want in their highway right of way. So, and they can require whatever they want in their highway right of way. So, just because you say this is what you want in your engineering standards or your complete streets policy does not mean that MDT has to follow that. So, but I think, one topic of discussion last night for a minute at the planning board was, bike path within the highway, and talking to MDT over the last several years about doing that. And I think, there's ways to try to get that accomplished. And I think MDT's Transportation Alternatives Program, which comes out every 2 years, I think one option might be to apply for TA funds through MDT. And part of that process would be, hey, we really need bike and pedestrian connectivity on the north end of Red Lodge, and here's why. And put together a solid application, in which case MDT funds and builds that infrastructure. And so if the project gets selected, so that might be an option as TA funds to accomplish that. MDT is typically not going to come through and build those facilities unless they have a project that's coming through. They're not just going to come in and build a bike path just because Red Lodge wants it. If they're going to reconstruct the highway through there, then they will oftentimes engage in the community and figure out what kind of pedestrian and bike connectivity is needed through that area, and they'll try to build that into their project. But if there's no project, they're not going to do it. So that's where the TA funds come into play. That TA program is meant for sidewalk, pedestrian, sidewalks, bike paths, things like that along city and MDT routes. So
I realize we have a cutoff time of 11 o'clock.
Oh, well, just for me, I'm leaving.
But I'm wondering now, you two planning board guys can be very helpful. What do we as a group, an advisory agency, need to put together to help this move forward? If we want the overlay for the C3N district, what do you guys need?
I think what I've heard so far is this approach of, as we update the current zoning, that we look at an overlay for this area, but then I also like the idea of looking longer term at setting up the condition, or setting up a situation where, if it looks like pursuing a form-based code may be the best approach to achieving the vision and goals for the URA, then we kind of have that kind of process started. But to me, the first step, so we're not delaying the update of our current zoning regulations, would be to look at what are the elements that we would like to see within, if we develop an overlay for the URA. Some of them are kind of laid out in terms of what you just went down the list of. We don't want strip malls. Those kinds of things are either articulated within the current zoning. They're certainly, or they're implied. So what I sort of see is taking a good hard look at our current zoning within C3 North and see how that either impedes or helps achieve things we want to see in the URA.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we need to make adjustments to the underlying code, like setbacks, is kind of the big one. If we want to see more green space, that's a big one that kind of needs to be addressed in the overlay, because
Okay,
we go with the current zoning, you're just going to get a 10-foot setback
Mm-hmm.
from Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of so I think, so the recommendation, I guess I would see is a recommendation from this board for the agency to make a recommendation to the planning board to at least look at an overlay for the URA and make that part of the current zoning. The other thing, though, it's more than just, I think, more than just having a list
right.
of what we don't and what.
Nice.
So I think the other thing that we need to this group needs to do is kind of better articulate what the vision is for the URA. You know, we've got the growth policy, the large growth policy. So I would recommend that each of us take a look at what the growth policy says for the community entrances, because that's been long-standing reflection of what the community has already articulated in terms of that. The other thing I would recommend is looking at the C3N North zoning regulations.
Right.
Jeremy, could you pull up C3 North or C3N zoning regulations?
And then I would look at the scenarios that ASU provided us, and what is it about those that we like, what is it about those that we don't like. The other piece of information that I think is important to help inform this group is to look at what the public has already told us
Yeah.
Right.
about what they want, because we had those public meetings. They pretty much articulated, one of those was more green space.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Another one was make the entrances attractive.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you weave that into
Specifics.
specifics?
Yep.
The other caution, though, I guess, relative to adding, you don't want to be too prescriptive either.
Right.
Exactly.
So there's kind of a balance there, but that's kind of where I see us. The first step is for this group to really take the information that we already have and look at it in terms of what the public has told us, what they'd like to see in the URA, and then that should help define what kinds of elements go into the overlay. So right now, I think it's a little premature for this group to just say we want an overlay for that district.
Yep.
I think you want to be able to articulate why you want the overlay and what kinds of elements need to kind of go into it to
Accomplish our goals, yeah.
to accomplish that goal. And like you say, you started with a pretty good list, or that Jeremy laid down a pretty good list, which I assume based on his work with us with the growth policy and current zoning, that's some of that is already reflected in our growth policy.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's just getting down to a little bit more of the specifics.
So you think before we recommend that there is an overlay, we should rethink what we want in the overlay?
Yeah, otherwise it's just
Right.
art.
Okay.
It's just what Jeff and I come up with.
Right.
Well, we do trust you, but not that far.
No, I think it's more meaningful if we put would like to see it with an overlay to encompass or incorporate these areas, whether it be setbacks, green space, landscaping, walking paths.
Right.
You know, there's,
So our next meeting is July, what, can we set a goal for our next
July
meeting?
20th.
July 20th. so-
Yep.
I will email to you the current, to all of you, the current C3 North.
Will you?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's very short,
Great.
but there's some things that I think there's assumptions that aren't in there that actually are already in there.
Can you, can you summarize for us?
Oh, it's really, it's like.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I just see this during the headlights.
Well,
Could the two of you, who know what's in there and know what's not in there, make some suggestions of, bring some suggestions to us at the next meeting?
here's what I
So
suggest.
that we would have a
Oh,
goal
sorry.
at the next meeting of
I think,
creating this resolution that we would send to the planning board.
I think, yeah, we can do that, but I think before that, this group needs to have a discussion about what you want to see in the URA.
Right,
So,
specific things, right?
What we
Yeah.
want to see and what we don't want to see,
probably, yeah, both, but I would say, again, you know,
what we
Make it
want.
positive.
look at the information we already
Right.
have that kind of, and this
Okay,
growth policy is going to lay out goals and objectives for
Sure.
C3 for the entrances. And then the concepts that KSU brought forward kind of laid out some things to look at, consider.
Yep.
Do we even like anything they brought forward? Are there elements that they brought forward that we like
mhm,
or don't like? I
Mhm.
mean, that's kind of the discussion I think this group kind of needs to kind of start looking at. Otherwise, we're just assuming we're at a clean slate, and I don't think we are. I think between growth policy, existing zoning, what KSU work has done is given a starting point for this group to start some serious in-depth discussion about.
So for the next meeting, what's our homework?
I would, I'll let Jeremy weigh in too, but to make sure I'm not overstating some things, but I think the next meeting, the homework would be to review the growth policy, review our current zoning, look at the KSU report. You know, I just pulled out, you know, just looking at the three concept summaries rather than the whole 56-page
Right,
thing.
Right.
And I pulled out the chapter 4 vision priorities out of the
report.
out of the urban renewal plan. So I would look at that. We also have an urban renewal plan, right, that has laid out goals and objectives.
Oh, yeah.
And then just pulled out the summary from the KSU report and kind of, you know, basically because it really summarizes what the public has told us, plus I just did the summaries of each of the three scenarios.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think. we should go
And from
one
this,
step-
come up with ideas of what we want.
Yes.
So if we can each do that individually,
Mhm.
I think so. It's
Yeah.
kind of like writing a term paper
yeah.
Well,
and taking a stab at it. And not all of our ideas will be great, but I think if we can take all of that information and kind of say, here are the important things, here are the really important things, here are the less important things. But if each one of us does that, when they won't be graded,
They
so
won't be
you don't have
graded.
to worry about that. But that puts the onus on
All of us,
us
yeah.
all to really take a look at this stuff instead of waiting for the group to flounder around and try to come up with something.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we have to create a word picture in essence. I mean, the recommendation that we put forth needs to
Yep.
be, is not like this or this or this. It's like, no, this is what our recommendation is. And not make it somebody else's decision. That's what our
Right.
job is.
And I think Jeff said, why do we want the overlay? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Why would it be useful? Do we really need it? Is it a pain in the neck?
Well, yeah, and also if we have specific instances, we really like this concept, but it doesn't fit with the current restrictions.
Sure.
Why doesn't it fit? Because of setbacks or something like that.
Mhm.
So that, yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was getting at before. You kind of have to have a vision of where you want to go.
right.
Yep, or you'll never get there.
And if you don't have that vision, you're just kind of struggling and ad hoc sort of.
And we've worked hard to get to that point where we can. We've done a lot of the homework already, thanks to KSU and the community meetings and everything, so.
And I guess the way I see it, once you have that idea, the goal and a vision kind of in place, then you can look at it, have a concrete look at current zoning, growth
Right.
policies. What is it that's going to impede achieving that vision? What
Right.
needs to change to, then you can start having that conversation of what the elements are that go into an overlay.
But, and I guess the other, part of the reason we initially had the conversation about overlay is there are elements within the URD that are not C3 North,
Uh-huh,
which is, that's the broader, so like the manufactured, mobile home park, that is not in C3 North, that's actually zoned differently.
part of it is though. The road goes down the boundary.
Yeah.
Coast Avenue, so part of it's
Part of it is
in,
and part of it isn't, you're right, one side of it
and part
is,
of it's
yes,
not
and part of
in,
it's not.
which makes it complicated,
But
but.
what, as we get through the process, we're also gonna be revising the map, but also the area south of the roundabout, and, Town Pump, the, Quality Inn,
Right,
and the bank are also all currently part of C3 North.
yeah,
So that doesn't, we're not gonna tell them that they have to do things differently, but it's just kind of messy the way it's
Right.
currently set up. So that's why we were looking at an overlay, is how do we just define this
okay,
for the
Great.
URD?
great.
There is another zone, it's C2.
If you,
C2 or C?
well, there's R2.
R2.
Well, that's
And then
residential.
there, actually, it's funny because the Alpine Basin is under C3 North, so.
Yes, but what I was getting at is C2 is kind of a mixed use.
Well, you're right, there is some, because
Right.
the cannery, I think, is
Yeah.
is C2.
What?
Yeah.
There are all those pieces mixed up? Definitely need an overlay.
That's, it's been a long time since the maps. been-
Because Joanne says we do.
Well, no, because if we're working with two different
Yes.
definitions
Yes.
of the area that we're working on, that's not,
But I think
Functional.
the important one to deal with is the
Portion.
Yeah, me too.
that's probably.
Okay, so, Madam Co-Chair, are you willing and or able to put together the agenda for
Yes.
July 20th?
yeah,
And sort of lay out some of this stuff and
Yes.
including what we have assigned ourselves to do?
yes,
Great.
I will try. I will run it by Jasmine.
You
Yes,
can always send out a draft and we'll
Thank you.
review.
okay, thank you.
Jeremy, just, that kind of approach that I laid out, does that make sense to you? For what this board needs to kind of do before go forward with the recommendation?
Yes, yeah, I think that if I understood what you were talking about, is basically that interim step that we were talking about setting up that overlay district with those additional or things that we want to see within that overlay district, initially, with that being a springboard towards possibly a future form-based code revision, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. I think getting that direction from this board to the planning board on what the district board wants to see within that overlay is important. So that the planning board's just not trying to come up with that themselves, but actually has direction from this board that manages that district. I just want to also clarify, I can't be at the July 20th meeting. I will be on vacation that week, so.
Okay,
That's okay. You need a vacation.
yeah.
So just to summarize, so we all leave with, so review master and growth plan for Jeff's suggestion, the original URD, plan,
At least the goals.
the goals and objectives,
Yep,
C3 North current zoning, which I'll summarize and send out, and the KSU tab, plan that, at least the portions of their ideas.
yep.
Okay, anything else?
I think
That's not
good.
enough?
Well, I think it's plenty, but they come
Yeah.
to the next meeting with our ideas. based on-
Absolutely. I think it's great. I think we can start things happening.
I think in the long term, Dave is going to send you that link to the billings code section that has their form-based code. I would say long term, I would encourage you all to look at that form-based code that billings has, and just so you can kind of understand what form-based code looks like in reality, right? So
Perfect.
reading articles and just reading stuff about what it is and how it may work is one thing, but actually seeing what it looks like in the code in
Right.
reality is
Right.
is really important. So I think just in the long term, reviewing that, taking a look at it, see what the practical application of form-based code actually looks like in a regulation.
Good idea. Anything else? Anything else from our audience?
Learning.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Got a lot of good notes.
Have you applied yet?
No, so, yeah, so,
Working with the mayor.
Okay,
It just showed up in the paper today, actually.
I saw it. Yeah,
Public notice.
thank you. And in that case, the meeting is adjourned, and I'll see you all on July 20th. And thanks to both of you guys. I'm so glad you're on the planning board.
Yeah.
It's really
Yes,
helpful.
it is. It's fantastic.